Hello, booktube. How are you? Welcome back to Reading Out of Season. I'm going to talk about ebooks today and e-readers, why somebody might choose to use them, and mainly financial decisions. Does it make financial sense to use an e-reader? Are you going to save money with an e-reader as opposed to just buying physical books? I know there are a lot of reasons why somebody might choose physical books, and I know that there's an issue with having a hold of physical media rather than trusting electronic media that you maybe don't thoroughly own. I know there are ways around that, but I don't know much about it. I have heard about different ways of storing your physical data so that people can't take it away, but I'm not a pro at that. I'm really not here to talk too much about how to store your files, as does it make sense financially to get an e-reader? And if so, which e-reader should you get? There's a lot to actually take into consideration, and so let's get started. So the first thing to think about is affordable reading and what has happened throughout the years. Of course, originally reading was very expensive. Books were extraordinarily expensive at one time. But in the modern era, books became really inexpensive, or at least there were really inexpensive versions of books available for everybody that made reading very financially accessible. And those were known as mass market paperbacks. They were cheaply made, they had small type and small margins. They were not made to last, and they sometimes did fall apart. And I have an example of a mass market paperback right here. And you can see that mass market paperbacks were not made to last. They yellowed easily, and they have tiny type and tiny little margins. But they served a real purpose. They made reading really affordable for people. However, mass market paperbacks aren't really a thing anymore. If you want to get a book and you want to get an actual physical book you can hold on to, you're likely to be buying a hardcover or a trade paperback, both of which are pretty expensive. So, what do you do if you want to read and you read quite a bit and you don't want to spend that much money? Well, e-readers can come in and save you money. However, there's a lot to take into account. There's a lot to think about whether they will save you money. And an important thing to take into consideration is that you can actually read ebooks without a specific e-reader. You can read them on your phone. And I know people think, oh, the screen's too small and it would be so difficult, but it isn't. I have bad eyes and I need to have the type to a fairly good size. And I got used to reading on my phone and swiping and to change the pages, and it became just as seamless as any other way of reading. I have also used old tablets. I had an old tablet I had sitting around that wasn't really doing anything else of practical use, and I turned it into an e-reader. So I've done that as well. And I have read ebooks in a computer browser. So if you don't mind sitting at a desk or sitting with a laptop, that is an option as well. However, I'm going to mainly talk about e-ink devices, and I have a couple of them. I have a Kobo, and I have a very old Kindle. So I'm going to talk about both of those and the differences and what maybe you should take into consideration when you're choosing which to get. The reason why most people choose to get an e-ink device is because they are more like reading a physical piece of paper. It feels like, it looks to the eyes a lot like just text on paper, and it doesn't emit light in the same way as a phone or a tablet. And so it doesn't tire the eyes, and you can read for a longer period of time without getting a headache, as can happen for some people with a tablet or a phone. So they are great, I think. However, are they worth the money? And so the question you have to ask yourself is, how much do you read? How do you get your books now? How would you get your books if you had an e-reader, and would that be different? And then what books specifically do you read? Do you read really new books or do you read older books? Those are all things to take into account when you're trying to choose what makes financial sense for you. I will talk about the most controversial issue, I guess, first, which is, how much do you hate Jeff Bezos? A lot of people make the decision based on that. And so, of course, if you just don't want to use Amazon devices, the decision is pretty easy for you. You would get the Kobo. I know I've heard people say, yes, you're just choosing, one corporation for another, but I don't think the Kobo company is anything like Amazon as far as how much power they have. So there isn't a billionaire behind it, I don't think. So um, there is a difference there, but again, that's not a decision based on your own financial needs. That's something that you're going to have to weigh in and decide, see if that makes any difference to you whatsoever as you're making the decision. And then the other question is, how do you get your books? Like, do you read a lot of library books? Do you read a lot of new books? Or would you be likely to use a subscription? For new books on either device are going to cost around $10 less per book to get on ebook than in a paper copy of the book. That is an average and it's a generalization, but that is what I have found. So that is one thing to take into account. If you read all new books and you read a lot of brand new books, you will save money, and at some point you will make up the cost of an e-reader. But how many brand new books are you reading, and how many older books are you reading? And how immediately do you need them? Because there are other ways to read new books, like putting in a reservation at the library. Of course, then you have to wait for the book to come in. So how patient are you? That's another thing to ask. So an older book is around $10 US, I would say. Again, it varies, and that's a generalization. When you get an ebook, somewhere around $10, you'll find an awful lot of books priced. They do frequently come on sale, and you can often get them cheaper if you keep your eyes open for when one comes up on sale. And then library accessibility. So Kobos are much easier to use with the library. So that is somewhere where I would put a little check mark in the Kobo realm. Overdrive shows up on the Kobo. You can put in your library card and you can search for books right from the Kobo, borrow them on the Kobo, return them on the Kobo, put on holds right on the Kobo. It is extremely easy to use library books on the Kobo. So if you read a lot of library books, then the Kobo might be the better choice for you. You can still read library books on a Kindle, it just takes more steps. So, do you not care? Are you techie? Will that be easy for you? Well, then maybe that doesn't make a difference. Another issue is whether you might use a subscription service. I have both Kobo Plus and Kobo Unlimited, and I can compare them for you if you'd like. Kobo Plus is slightly less expensive than Kindle Unlimited. In US dollars, Kobo Plus is about $8 and Kindle Unlimited is about $12 a month. So that's about $48 a year difference between the two. So then the question is, how many books would you be likely to read off of Kobo Plus and Kindle Unlimited? And really, they both have good options. They both have a lot of good books. Kindle Unlimited has more good books. So if you are going to read a great number of books from a subscription service, Kindle might be your better choice. Of course, you have to keep in mind that there is a $48 difference a year. So if you could buy almost 5 newer books and have a Kobo Plus subscription for the same cost as a Kindle Unlimited subscription in a year. So just think about that. What the right answer is will be different for different people, depending on your reading habits and what you like to read. There are good choices on both, more choices and more good choices on Kindle Unlimited. There is very little overlap between them. So I do actually have both, and I read books off of each of those services. And most of the books I read are off one service or the other or the library. And I have tons of options. I read 2 books a week generally, if they're shorter books than maybe 3 books in a week. And I have no problem keeping up with my book reading almost exclusively from those sources. So if you read a lot and you're flexible with what you read, you're willing to find something that's available to you on a subscription service, then a subscription service might be of use to you. However, if you are very, very picky about what specifically you read, a subscription service won't be probably of use to you because the options available are not necessarily going to be exactly what you want. And if you read mainly really new books, you will probably seldom find what you want, if you ever do, on your subscription service. They're mainly going to be backlist and older books. So another consideration is the ease of searching for these subscription books. And I find Kobo a little easier once you get the algorithm to know you than Kindle. And I think that's partially because uh, Kindle has a lot more advertising, and so you will constantly get their suggested titles for books that people have paid to promote. And Kobo doesn't really have that. You'll really just see what Kobo thinks you want to read. So, as far as that goes, I would say Kobo wins. However, in both cases, you have to physically search for books and find some you like and let the algorithm start knowing you and suggesting good books to you. Neither of them have very good browsing services. It's not easy to just go in and see what they have and find good things. It's much easier to search for books, find books you like, and then have the algorithm learn and start suggesting you good books. So, you want to think about how many library books you read now, whether you would read more library books if you could get them seamlessly on a Kobo. That's something to pay attention to too. If your library isn't very close to you, library books will suddenly become much more accessible to you. And where I live, my closest library doesn't have a very good ebook selection, but my library has a cooperative agreement with other libraries in the state. And so I have a library card for another library in the state that has an excellent ebook selection. And so I have tons of books, and I would not be driving that far to go to the library. So I probably get a lot more books from the library than I did before. I have better selection available. I have tons of books available through that way, and I read a lot from the library. So the Kobo, I think for me, is probably the better choice, although I still did end up getting my Kindle going again, though, so I could use Kindle Unlimited because there are so many great books there. I love old mysteries, and there are a lot of old mysteries on Kindle Unlimited. I can find almost anything I want to read in as far as old mysteries go on one or the other. If you have other ebooks available, for instance, I bought some cookbooks that were sent to me as an ebook file from the author. Those you can send to your device in various ways. In Kindle, there's a send to Kindle way, which I think is through email. With Kobo, though, Kobo will hook up directly to Google Drive and directly to Dropbox. And so it can read books from your Google Drive or your Dropbox. And that's a way you can get other books into your device. And of course, you can sideload for either of them. So you also want to think about how many books are you going to run out and buy for $10 on these devices? Are you going to overspend? I would suggest not buying books unless they go on sale until you actually plan to read them, because you could buy a book for $15 or $20 if it's brand new, and then end up having it go down in price to $5 not that long after, by the time you actually get around to reading it. You can search, of course, and get books at any moment when you want them, no matter where you are. If you're on vacation somewhere, as long as you have Wi-Fi, you can get books. That is another benefit to them over physically going to the library and bringing library books with you. And you get a 2 or 3 week rental period from the library, and the book automatically becomes unavailable to you. So if you regularly have fines at the library for turning your books in late, that problem will go away. If you do want an e-reader, another thing to pay attention to is the cost of the actual e-reader. The cheapest Kobo is about $140, and the cheapest Kindle is around $90 to $100. So Kindles are cheaper. However, that cheapest Kindle is going to have ads on it, and if you pay to get the ads taken off, it will cost right around what the Kobo costs. So, are you willing to save money by having ads show up for you all the time? That's another thing to pay attention. And when you're looking at the home page of your screen, do you want ads to show up on your home page? My Kindle has had the ads removed, so I don't see those ads when I go into my Kindle, but that might annoy you if you don't get rid of the ads. You can get the Kindle and then later pay to get the ads taken off if they annoy you, so it's not a decision you have to make at the beginning. Another consideration is how much battery life is important to you and how much a color screen is important to you. Black and white screens cost less and use less battery. Color screens, if you're reading something like that has pictures, if you're reading things with a lot of pictures, like I have some recipe books, then maybe a color e-reader would work better for you, but they are more expensive. I think if I had to do it over again, I might have gotten the black and white one just because I have to charge my Kobo more frequently than I would like. On the other hand, I I can charge it at home very easily and it doesn't take that long to charge up. So it really isn't that big of a deal. It just depends for you personally how much that's going to bother you. And then another thing to take into consideration is whether you can get used devices. And used Kindles are easier to find than used Kobos. However, if you get a used Kindle, because it's used, the battery will be older and it will not hold charge as well. So don't expect to get a used device and have the battery life of a new one. If people are moving to a new device and are getting rid of their used one, there's a good chance that it's because the battery isn't working as well anymore. Again, they don't take long to charge. That's probably not that big a deal. It's just something to keep in mind. I hope that's given you some things to think about as far as whether or not an e-reader and an e-ink reader would be useful to you as a reader. I am sure I save a great deal of money by using e-readers because I read a lot. If you are only reading a few books a year, you are unlikely to save much money. If you're unlikely to save money with an e-reader. If you read a lot, it is very likely you can, and you can save quite a bit depending on whether you use the library and whether you are able to find things you like in these subscription services. So take that into consideration. Think about your own reading habits. Think about your likes and your dislikes. Think about how important it is to you to own physical media and whether that's important for every book you have or whether that's really just for some very special books, because that answer is different for everybody too. And hopefully from there, you'll come to a plan and figure out what exactly works best for you. If you have any specific questions, please do leave the questions below, and I am very happy to answer based on my experience. Obviously, I have a Kobo and a Kindle, and I also had a Nook at one time when I was living in the US. I've had these devices for a very long time, and I have a lot of knowledge about how they work, and I am happy to give any information that I can. And if you have questions that you'd like answered in future videos, I'm happy to do that as well. Just let me know. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.